Hello and welcome to the Athletic Soccer Show. It's time for our World Cup post-game show to talk through a relatively quiet evening of World Cup football. Nothing major happened. There's very little to discuss. My name is Jack Collins and I'll be your host. And joining me to work through it all is Mr. Peter Rutzler. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I don't know how I am, Jack. Yeah, football. That's the vibe, isn't it? I mean, bloody hell. What a night.
It's been some day, Peter. Yeah, what a
day,
night,
yeah.
but then also what an afternoon, exactly. And I think we had this same thing yesterday, obviously, when we were talking about these games and discussing things, that you kind of forget about the madness of the afternoon and the madness of the evening when it becomes so stressful like that. But we'll start with this evening's games in Group E. Costa Rica 2, Germany 4, Japan 2, Spain 1, just as we all expected. But I genuinely think the whole thing about this was maybe the fact that the game's just swung from pillar to post. At one point tonight, we had Costa Rica and Japan progressing. At one point tonight, we had Germany and Spain progressing. At one point tonight, we had Japan and Spain progressing. That's obviously how it ended. There was only about one permutation that didn't come up this evening, and it all just felt completely chaotic from start to finish.
Well, that's kind of the magic of having all the groups and having so many teams still in play. I think it is like the first tournament since 2002 after the second round, having I think only 3 teams through. And this is what you get, because if your team has something to play for and both teams do on the same pitch, you're going to get sort of carnage. The thing is, especially with the Group E games, going into half time, I'm thinking, the direction of travel is pretty clear here. We know what's happening. Germany, they've kind of done enough here. I can't see Costa Rica coming back. Japan, they were more of the question mark, but Spain were winning. Very cool, calm games. And then Moriyasu, I put it all down to him, master of chaos, master of substitutes. Maybe they felt it in the Germany-Costa Rica game, because it was similar times, I suppose. But Japan came flying out the block second half. Instant impact from Doan again, exactly what we saw in that first game. And then the carnage with the second goal. Then suddenly you're switching over to Costa Rica, and Costa Rica are just pulling out the bag out of nowhere. It was just absolute bedlam. It was definitely a night for triple screening. Just seeing people just have collective meltdowns on Twitter and social media, and then trying to keep across both games. Crazy, absolutely crazy.
It was stressful. It was stressful on 2 screens. Never mind 3. I had to leave social media alone for the most part, I think. I don't even know which order to go to these games. This is how sort of mad it was. Let's start with Spain, Japan, because the first half was a procession, right? And this is it. It was one of those kind of moments that you're looking at it and going, right, Spain are completely in control here. They have dominated it in the same way that they kind of did against Costa Rica. Not quite as much kind of progression of the ball and not quite as much clear-cut chances. But generally, I think that we looked at this and thought, wow, this is a Spain side completely and utterly in control of this game. And Japan had very, very little in the first half. Now, maybe that's how they wanted it. Obviously, the goal would have disappointed them in the way that Morata slides between 2 centre-backs. But equally, at 1-0 at half-time, they're probably like, yeah, okay, we can hold on to this. And you're thinking what Japan will try and do here is snuff this out for 30 more minutes and then maybe give Spain 15 minutes of blast to see if they can turn things around. But like at halftime, there was absolutely nothing to suggest that Japan were going to turn this around, especially in the time frame that they did.
No, maybe we're looking at it wrong, considering the first game. Maybe we should have seen this coming. Maybe we're all naive. Spain were naive, just to assume that it would be a procession. But it did feel like that. You're right. I know they ran the changes. There were a few changes at the back. Azpilicueta, Torres, Balde, Williams. But even then, it didn't really seem to disrupt their rhythm. This was the same Spain we'd seen in the first 2 games. Japan never really got into it. We didn't see that high energy that caused Germany so many problems until the second half. And, that's how it sort of transpired. Obviously, Morata scores, and, your early shout for Morata the other day saying, Golden Boot is on. It looked like way, creating chances.
Golden Boot on.
And yeah, you're right. Japan were not really in the game in the same way, but once more, the manager's gone in at halftime, made changes. Clearly, it must be planned, this, because the way Japan came out with their intensity, It's playing on being relentless. It's playing on when you're on top, capitalizing in those moments, and that's exactly what they did. First goalkeeper should probably do better, you could argue. I mean, he probably catches him flat-footed to face a shot like that, because he's been, it's just not done very much all game. I mean, he had looked a little shaky, Simon, with some of his distribution. Looked like every now and again, who was it? I think it was Maeda. Maeda looked like he was pressing him, getting onto him a little bit, and you just thought maybe, but this was Spain. They're competent and fine. And then a loose pass. Oh, I said loose pass, a difficult one to get under control, and then ball's turned over and the ball's in the back of the net. And yeah, I think, I mean, the game changed at that point, and then the second goal, which was, I mean, that's a serious talking point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was the kind of rapid fire nature of the goals was incredible. And I tweeted at the time saying, yes, we saw substitutes change the game in the game against Germany, sure. Have we ever seen two substitutes combine in 5 minutes to turn a game on its head? And especially a game on its head, which had been so controlled by one side in the first half. And having that impact, obviously, as you say, the first goal comes from Doan, and the second goal is a Matoma assist. So the two halftime substitutes have a goal and assist between them in the first 5 minutes of the second half. And then also, Doan gets the hockey assist, I suppose, for the second goal as well. It's his cross across the box that sets up the chance in the first place. So I've never quite seen substitutes make that much of a difference in that smaller time frame, and to turn a game so distinctively one-sided into a completely different ball game in the second half. But yeah, I mean, the second goal is always going to come under some scrutiny in terms of whether the ball was in or out. This is the thing. There's no way that you and I can sit here and say it was definitely one or the other. But the angles from the top down pictures look like there's a very, very good chance that this ball is still in play.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to make what we can of the information that's come out, because I don't think there was a clip shown of the incident again, which is a bit curious, to be honest, because it just breeds conspiracy, doesn't it? When you don't come forward and just show the evidence, you can make mistakes, that's fine. But when you actually see some of the pictures that have come out, there's a few close-ish to top down. Of course, with incidents like this, when you see a ball placed on the floor next to a line, it looks very different from side on than it does from top down, because it's spherical. So once you get past that, even then it's still really tight, isn't it? And I think you're right. Yeah. I don't think we can, unless there's a definitive shot above the ball, which I'd be surprised if there was one. It's hard to say. I think it is in, but that's not me saying it from a position of absolute certainty, because, as you say, there can't be. And then again, you think, well, if it's in that situation, does it count as clear and obvious error? I mean, clearly they've seen something maybe that we haven't seen yet. But it's absolutely massive ramifications, of course. But I mean, that's the nature of these high stakes group stage games at this point. I think the thing is, I think the initial angles when you see side on, if you take account for the ball's fatness, roundness, then maybe you can see how it's over touching the line, because that's all it needs to be, is touching the line. But yeah, my goodness, it's close. Another great goal, as you say, a great ball in from Doan, and then Matoma knocks it back in. But that just completely shocked Spain, completely threw them. And wow, and then it set up a really frantic, enjoyable, a unique experience for about 10, 15 minutes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. We're going to cross between games here, because this is the point where it all went a bit mad. Well, I think so, because we could go and discuss the end of the Spain game. It wouldn't really make sense without the context of what's happening, because Germany had also gone in 1-0 up at the break. A really nice Serge Gnabry header from a David Raum cross, really well worked. And Germany were all over Costa Rica like a rash, to be perfectly honest with you, in the first half. It's a really strange one in terms of where that is and how it works. There's nearly a second. There's a good save from Navas from a Goretzka header. But there is chances for Costa Rica, and one falls to Fuller, who obviously scored the winner in the Japan game. He has a shot tipped over by Neuer when there's a massive mix-up in the defense. And in a way that maybe there wasn't in the Japan-Spain game, it did feel like Germany had a mistake in them, and the Costa Rica might be able to pounce on that. And then suddenly, you get into the second half, same pattern, Germany moving the ball, but no real penetration. And then suddenly Costa Rica score. And it comes from this bizarre thing where Neuer, who had been so brilliant in the first half, then gets to this point where you're like, what are you doing? Why have you just palmed that out into the middle of the goal? And Costa Rica take advantage. And the same kind of thing happens in that 2 minutes later, they score again. And you're like, they've scored again. And this was in between all this, Musiala had hit the post twice. And then Rudiger hit the post. And Costa Rica went up the other end and scored again. And suddenly it was all chaos because Spain were out. Japan withdrew, Costa Rica withdrew, and a team that had been beaten 7-0 on their opening day was suddenly in the knockout stages for a brief period.
It was absolutely sensational. The scenes when Costa Rica took the... It was one of those, because everyone probably, this is me trying to switch from 1-1. Turned it on to because I had one which had 2 minutes delay, and then one that's in real time, because after the goal, I thought, well, why not? And the ball, once Costa Rica had scored, you're watching it, you're thinking, has that actually gone in? Is that actually a goal? It was, because sometimes, especially nowadays with VAR and everything else, and I couldn't tell if the ball had hit the side netting, but I mean, clearly it had got in. But I was trying to convince myself that the ball had gone in.
This was it.
Yeah. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So absolutely phenomenal. And as you say, Germany had smashed the post 3 times. The Costa Rica goal net had been shaking, but there were signs, as you mentioned. There was that fantastic save from Neuer in the end. It was from a mistake, wasn't it? At the back, I think Ram doesn't. It's just a long ball forward. It's exactly what Costa Rica did against Japan. Misses it. Campbell goes through, shoots, saves, and then moments later there was another break, like a 5-on-2 or 5-on-3, right on half time, where Campbell, I think, gets kicked and doesn't get the foul, and then the referee blows for half time. And you're thinking, hold on a minute, in a way that wasn't happening in the Spain game on another channel. This game, there was something there for Costa Rica, and considering what had happened for Germany against Japan, who knows? Who knows what could have taken place? And that's exactly what happened in the second half. Germany don't take their chances. They don't add that clinical cutting edge to their play. Well, not quickly enough anyway. And they're punished. And what you have to say is that they reacted very well. They, rather than it just completely overthrowing them and them freezing, which can happen, you can drop the tempo, which we saw a bit with Denmark against Australia. Germany comes straight back at them. They continue to make those chances and they take them as well. Kai Havertz scoring. I think I saw a stat saying that more Chelsea forwards have scored more at the World Cup than they have in the league this season, which I think is 9-8.
Add Koulibaly to the list, and maybe you might be right.
Well, yeah, I think it's about right. So, yeah, I mean, but by this point, it's out of their hands, isn't it? Because of what's going on in the Spain game. Füllkrug's come off the bench again, and I think that's another talking point as well. The fact that he scored in all of his appearances.
Yeah, goal and assist, which is impressive, and lots to like about that. But equally, I think you're absolutely right. By this point, by the time that Germany were back in the lead, it kind of felt like it's like, all right, Germany have to dig themselves out of a hole. We expected them to. They did. They dug themselves out, but they were also then reliant on Spain digging themselves out of a hole. And that equaliser for Spain never came. It never materialised. And to be perfectly honest with you, it didn't really look like materialising either. And this is partly due to Japan's defensive organisation, which was superb, and they deserve immense credit for this. But also, there was an element of Lucho threw his cards on the table when they went 2-1 down and took Morata off. Brought on Asensio, who's playing, I don't want to say a false 9, because not every person who's not a striker playing a 9 is a false 9, but definitely playing a slightly withdrawn role, if you will. And then kind of moving on from that, they kind of like, it did feel a bit like he was like, I'm going to do this my way, and if my way doesn't work, then so be it. Now, obviously, it's not come back to bite Spain in the arse too much because they are through. But equally, you're looking at this and go, okay, well, there are places you can get at Spain. And Lucho will have to learn from some of these things. I think he will see Morata as a substitute coming on, going forward, because I think he adds more impact than perhaps any of his other strikers do off the bench. But also, it did feel like Spain were knocking it about relatively comfortably once this happened, got towards the end. And there was an element of, this isn't an accusation because I don't want this to be read the wrong way, but was Spain just a bit like, okay, I think we're going through, this is quite comfortable, we'll try our best to score. And they did, and Olmo had a good chance, and Ferran nearly knocked in a rebound as well and was denied. But it was a bit like, well, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen because we're going through anyway.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, they didn't have that same intensity, and you can maybe look at it 2 ways. You go on that controversial question side, think, are they that bothered about being on that side of the draw? Let Japan win the group, and maybe it's an easier route to the semi-finals, or was it something a little bit more concerning? well, I mean, it depends how you want to see the way that to seeing out a game would go. But the fact that they didn't really react that well, nor create that many chances when falling behind. Obviously, the first time we've seen them do that in this tournament. Slightly concerning, I'd say. You'd expect them to create more chances more consistently, especially chasing a game. And, for a period, Germany were in trouble against Costa Rica. And I would have been very interested to see Spain's reaction if there had been that bit longer where we had Japan and Costa Rica potentially going through. That news would have then filtered through from the stadium. We would have seen that intensity. As it was, there was not the same intensity because they knew they were going through. But at the same time, it wasn't the most encouraging reaction at that point in the game. And that ultimately, it didn't cost them too much, and maybe they've ended up with a good draw with Morocco. But I mean, there's no good draws, and I think that's one of the other takeaways. Really, I think there's a lot of correcting opinions in terms of the strength of some of the nations that have come to this tournament. I think a lot of presumptions have been shown up to be incorrect. I think the idea of upsets is the shocks shouldn't be as shocking as they are, and I think there may just be a bias element that, quite simply, and it's good. It's good for the sport, and it makes a fantastic entertainment, because if that's also applying to the teams, the major nations, your former world champions, then great. What great knockouts we can have as well.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think I'd rather play Croatia than Morocco based on what we've seen in the group stages in terms of those two sides. And I actually think that Spain would probably prefer to face up a Croatia side who are equally a little bit passive, who like to knock the ball about, and I don't think that would be the best game in the world, but I think Spain would probably overcome Croatia. Yeah. Whereas Morocco are direct, they're dynamic, they have threats from various places, and they're quite good at getting into those positions that Japan really obviously benefit from today. And I think that's a tough draw for Spain. But this side of the draw doesn't have them meeting Brazil in the quarterfinals. If on paper, shall we say, right now. So there is that element of it. It would end up, if everything goes in terms of the favourites, with them meeting France in the semis. But I think by the semi-finals, you're kind of looking at everyone's going to be good at that point. So it's not too much of a problem in that regard. But with that, I think we should probably move on to the other group, considering we're discussing those teams anyway. And obviously we saw Group F coming on earlier. What a segue that was. Canada lost 2-1 to Morocco, and Croatia and Belgium played out a 0-0 draw that sent Croatia through. We'll start with that game, Peter, because one, I think it's quicker to get through, and two, it was a bit of a strange encounter in many ways, because Belgium looked better than they have done in most of this tournament, and yet couldn't break the deadlock. And it's just come to a point where you're looking at this Belgium team and kind of waving goodbye by saying, well, what's happening here? What's happened? This is very much the end of the golden generation. It's done. And Belgium probably deserved to win today, I think, but they didn't deserve to go through this group.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. I actually think Croatia weren't that bad. I think they showed their qualities in terms of managing games. But you're right in terms of the chances that Belgium created at halftime. They just didn't deserve it on the basis of the 3 games. We've talked about how, as a generation, and with so much talent in them, and them almost buying into this idea that they're old, which is something you take on yourself, really, I suppose. As much as it's said about you, they lacked that energy again. I think today was a bit, in the first half, I was really trying to work out what system they were trying to do. They tried to sort of match Croatia a little bit. There was more of a back four. Dendoncker stepping into midfield alongside Witsel. Carrasco with this sort of role where he'd come infield to man-mark Modric, then step out wide when they had the ball. I was shifting it between a 4-2-3-1 and a 4-3-2-1 Christmas tree style. And then occasionally on a back 5 as well. Maybe showing a tactical fluidity that we hadn't really seen as much, actually, from Belgium in previous games. But the first half was tepid. Both teams were just, strolling through it. We're not really bothered about it. The changes at halftime made an impact, as you'd expect, because if you're going to play Dries Mertens up front on his own, let's say on his own, Trossard was getting near him. I thought it was a better system, got more out of De Bruyne, but again, you're just lacking that final target, really, for your team to play around. And unsurprisingly, they were better with Lukaku on the pitch.
Although I'm sure of course there were people that debate that.
Well, this is the point. I mean, they created better chances. But their problem was Lukaku didn't take them. And, there was really good analysis, at least on the BBC over here in the UK, about, the way the situation Lukaku finds himself in, having not being match fit, not having that rhythm, and then also lacking anticipation. A lot of these chances were snap chances that if you're in form, in the zone, you take them. And
If he's in form, he scores a hat trick. This is it.
At least,
Lukaku's been playing up to the point where this tournament starts. He scores a hat trick in the second half. It's as simple as that. And people will use this as an excuse to bash him. And look, whatever people are going to do, they're going to do. But this is a man who I feel incredibly sorry for. Because you look at these games and you think of the way that these have played out, the heartbreak and the anguish on his face at full time, knowing that he had the opportunities. I think he had over half of Belgium's XG in the entire game fell to him, which is never that pleasant if you haven't scored a goal. But in these circumstances in particular, where that you had the opportunity to send your country to the knockout stages of the World Cup and you've missed them, he's gonna be having nightmares for weeks over this at the very minimum. And ultimately, I did feel for him because he's been thrown into a situation that clearly is not ideal in terms of injuries or form or fitness, and kind of asked to be the savior figure. And when it's all gone wrong, he's going to be the one shouldering all the blame as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's come into it. He's rushing back from, I think, it's a hamstring injury, isn't it? It's just not an ideal scenario. You need others to step up in that situation. And as you say, a fully fit Lukaku takes those chances. But you can't lay the blame of these 3 games on his door. There's so much quality in this team. I know that they're aging. I think actually their team today, the starting lineup, is another bit of trivia for you, Jack. I think second oldest team this century at a World Cup in the starting lineup, because Dries Mertens is 35, isn't he? So, yeah, it was an old team, but at the same time, there's so much quality. We've seen, Hazard's dropped out, Trossard's come in, use some of those youngsters a little bit more. And I mean, second half they were better. I actually thought Croatia started second half better, and they didn't really have that they didn't have the same impetus that Belgium did. Belgium had to score. They knew what was going on in the Morocco-Canada game. Yet it was Croatia that came out saying, actually, we want to win the group. We want to avoid Spain.
That didn't work out. Yeah,
that didn't quite work out like that. But that was, for me, it was really quite striking. And obviously, it took Lukaku to get into the rhythm and for Belgium to eventually get going. But you can't lay the blame on his door entirely. I mean, it's a bad day, but it's tough for him because he'll have those chances playing over in his mind when we all know a fit Lukaku takes at least one of those. At the very least.
Yeah. At the very, very least. Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
In the other game, Canada 1, Morocco 2. Really good game, this. Really enjoyed it. Obviously, it starts with a horrible error from Bojan in the Canada net, who comes to receive a ball, doesn't sort of get stuck between trying to control it and trying to clear it, and basically takes a really heavy touch into the path of Hakim Ziyech, who says thank you very much and clips it over him for 1-0 very, very early on. But it was a really good start from Morocco. Even before that, they had a great ball in, which was just missed from Ziyech in the first couple of minutes. Canada recovered quite nicely, to be honest, and then were hit by the sucker punch of a second goal from En-Nesyri, who finally arrived at the tournament. It's his second World Cup he scored at, but I think we've been waiting for En-Nesyri to finally arrive and kind of get this Morocco side firing on all cylinders. Lovely pass from Hakimi, gets him behind, and he absolutely thumps it past the keeper. Not much he can do about that one. Canada looked a bit tired. The tails were up, and they were still trying, but you could tell that kind of the injuries, the occasion, it all started to, I think, pile up on this team. And then they get a little bit lucky, right? They get the reward for that perseverance and an own goal. Wrong foot's the keeper. First own goal of this tournament in game 41. That's good. Enjoyed that a lot. Enjoyed the fact there haven't been own goals, especially because
you've been waiting for that as well.
Last Euros felt like they were just full of them. So I was delighted to see that it has taken a while to get an own goal in. It was a bit harsh on Morocco, but I thought it was just a reward for Canada's perseverance.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gutted that Atiba Hutchinson didn't score as well. It was even millimeters away, I think, from scoring on his 101st cap, age 39. I mean, that would have been absolutely phenomenal. You're right. I think with Canada, the impetus has gone a little bit. It's natural, the scenario that they're in, eliminated. against a team which has so much to play for, and again showed that fantastic energy that we've seen. They're such a nicely balanced team. You know, they've got quality in their fullback areas. They've got quality in forward areas. Yeah, you're right. It was great to see En-Nesyri get on the score sheet. Absolutely fantastic ball from Hakimi, wasn't it? Absolutely pinpoint
really
into
good.
his pass and
really good.
into his path. Sorry, and he takes it really, really well. And you know, Morocco struck early. They got those 2 goals. They got control of the game. They got control of their fate. Never looked in any sort of real doubt, to be honest. And that's a credit to them, a credit to what we've seen from them in this tournament. They're not going to be easy in the next round for Spain. Let me check my notes. Yes, it's Spain. I've had so many names crossed out because I've been doing it as it's been going along. Should just waited really until the results. But you know, they're going to cause problems.
Croatia
You know,
their wish, they avoided them.
Yes, they did with incredible foresight. But no, it's a fantastic achievement for Morocco overall. I think it's the first time they've finished. I think the first time an African team's finished top of a group since '98.
Yes, I believe so.
From and then 2 sides going through as well, which is brilliant. With Senegal joining them, and it's massively encouraging. Again, going back to the earlier point I made about
Ghana in with a fair good shot tomorrow.
Well, more than
making that 3, which is incredible. Yeah,
I mean, revenge is on the cards for them, isn't it? So.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Not to upset any Uruguayans listening, but I think that would be a nice revenge served cold. Right, before we go, fun question for you. What I liked about Morocco today, as much as anything else, was that they fielded 9 players wearing the 1 to 11 shirt, which is the joint most at this tournament with 2 other nations. Can you name the other 2 nations who have fielded 9 of their 1 to 11s?
My God, I mean, yeah, I knew this was coming. Yeah, I knew this was coming. I've had it coming after my previous attempts to put you on the spot. I had another one today, but it didn't really become as relevant, so I've not mentioned it. But you know, 2 other nations have named 9 of their 1 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. This is literally going to have to be a guess.
Go for it.
Incredible.
You've got 1 in 30, 2 in 31 chance of getting it right. You're right.
This is true. France?
No, sadly not.
That is very disappointing. Right. God, trying to think of teams that have come into the tournament with a clear sort of 11. Denmark.
No, sorry, I'm afraid that they're 2 incorrect answers. The correct answers are Brazil against Switzerland. Brazil against Switzerland. That was very impressive, and that was without Neymar, obviously, who wears that famous 10 shirt. So that was good, but they fielded only Vinicius Jr. and Militao, who were outside of the 1 to 11, and the other one was England.
No, was it really?
Yeah. There you go.
Wow.
So yeah, there was a couple of nice ones in for them there for you, and with that,
well, you've done well.
There you go.
You've done well because at least with the trivia ones I gave you, you still got them.
I was trying to make it difficult. I was trying to make it difficult enough that you wouldn't get anywhere near them. That was the dream. Perfect. Right, it's probably time for us to call it a day then, Peter. All that's left for me to do is say thank you so much to everyone for listening and for watching across the various channels on the Athletic Soccer Show. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Rutzler, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Jack. Always a pleasure.
It was a real pleasure having the Thursday Club reunited today. This has been your Athletic Soccer Show World Cup post game. We'll see you in a couple of days. Take it easy.